The following podcast is going to contain spoilers, along with me, just a regular guy, talking about all the things I love, such as comics, movies, television, music, and books. So yeah, proceed at your own risk. And welcome to another episode of Just Another Fanboy. I'm your host. My name is Steven. And today I'm going to take you back to 1987, February of 1987, for a Marvel comic book, Iron Man number 215. Now, before we get into the book itself, let's talk about the cover for a moment, because there's just something about this cover I am just loving it. Like a McDonald's sandwich. It's a pretty basic cover. It's got two different Iron Mans on the front. There's I guess they're both classic armor at this point. There's the old red and gold and the red and silver. Now, at this time in the Iron Man mythos, he is wearing the red and silver, but someone else is wearing the red and gold. We'll get into that in a second, but you've got both suits of armor and they're in space. That's pretty much it, but there's just something about the cover that I don't know. It's so visually appealing to me for some reason. And it was drawn by Mark Bright. We'll get into the credits of the issue here in a bit as well, but it says right there on the cover exactly what we're dealing with. Beginning a new era of greatness, because this is when we get a certain creative team on Iron Man. We've got David Michelinie as the writer, Mark Bright as the penciler, Bob Layton on inks. Actually, David Michelinie is listed as plot/script, and Bob Layton is listed as plot/inks. And that team right there, that's my Iron Man. This is the time when I was really getting into Iron Man. Now, I read issues now and again before issue number 215, but issue 215 leads us down a path toward a storyline. I think it was just 4 issues. It might have been more, might have been 6, that they, at the time in the books, they called Stark Wars, but now we just refer to it as the Armor Wars. And it was this whole plot line where Tony found out that people were stealing his technology and using it without his permission, and in many cases was being used by villains. And so he made it a mission to go out and take out anybody, basically to get his armor back, to shut it down. Anybody who's using his technology, he creates something to just shut it down so they can't use it anymore. But we have to get to that point first. And like I said, we've got 2 different Iron Mans on this front cover. I'm going to take you back a bit. If you're not all that up to date on who Iron Man is, or maybe the only Iron Man you're really all that hip to is the one in the movies. So Iron Man is Tony Stark. Inventor, genius, billionaire, cocky guy, ladies' man, as played by Robert Downey Jr. in the movies. At some point in the early 80s, late 70s, I'm not exactly sure when. I don't, off the top of my head, I can't pinpoint an exact time. But we learn that Tony Stark is an alcoholic. And it takes over his life. He hits the deep end and he sinks about as low as he can sink. And it's at that point he's wearing the red and gold that you see for most of the 80s. Most of the 80s, he's wearing the red and gold. But most of the 80s, or a lot of the 80s, it's not him in that red and gold, because when he hits rock bottom, he realizes that he should not be wearing, an alcoholic, a drunk, should not be wearing armor. And they shouldn't be out there fighting crime because they're going to hurt somebody. And so he realizes it's time to get clean, and he talks his buddy, James Rhodes, who is played by Don Cheadle in the movies, he talks him into wearing the Iron Man armor while Tony goes off and gets clean. And so throughout a lot of the 80s, it's not even Tony Stark in the armor. If you've read Secret Wars, the Iron Man in Secret Wars, James Rhodes, the Iron Man in West Coast Avengers, up to a certain point. Once he we do have Tony Stark in West Coast Avengers, but when the West Coast Avengers begins, when that whole thing starts, it's Rhodey as Iron Man. Now, eventually, Rhodey will be given the War Machine. I'm getting it mixed up with Ironmonger. He'll be given the War Machine armor, which is what he wears in the movies. And that, I can't, you know what? My memory's kind of fuzzy, but I feel like the War Machine armor, that was a whole product of the 90s, the big guns, the anti-villain thing that everybody was loving so much in the 90s, because Wolverine was getting really popular. The Punisher was getting really popular. Venom, at one point in the 90s, they made Venom, quote unquote, a good guy. He had his own book called Venom Lethal Protector. And so everybody was kind of jumping on board this dark, black, guns, anti-hero type of thing. And I feel like War Machine was a product of that. But hey, War Machine's still a thing, and it's a very major character in the Avengers franchise. And it was one of those that I really enjoyed back in the day. But before that, he was Iron Man. Rhodey was Iron Man for a while. Now, when issue 215 hits, I don't remember reading a lot of books before this. I read a few, but they talk about at one point, Rhodey makes a joke to Tony, because at this point, Tony is now in the new armor. He's Iron Man. He's in the red and silver armor. But Rhodey still has the old armor, the red and gold. And he makes a joke or something at one point in the book where he says, I know you've been trying to get me back into the armor, but he doesn't seem like he wants to be in the armor. And yet he does have to get into it at some point in this issue. So let's talk about the issue, because this is the era of Iron Man that I remember quite fondly. So we start out, Tony is at the doctor. He's finishing up with an appointment. He's been diagnosed with this unknown deterioration in his nervous system, that if it gets any worse, if it progresses, he could die. And they want to keep him overnight or for a few nights just to run some tests. And he's not, has it really gotten that bad, doc? And the doctor's like, well, no, not really. It's not that bad at all. But again, if it gets worse, you could die. And we just kind of want to keep an eye on it, see if we can kind of figure out what's wrong. Well, Tony kind of knows what's wrong. He's already deduced that these problems that he's been having, which started with several weeks of bouts of nausea and muscle twitches after having been in the Iron Man armor, the new Iron Man armor. If he's in the Iron Man armor for a bit, he starts having these symptoms. So he knows that whatever's wrong with his nervous system, it's coming from his armor. And even at one point, he thinks to himself, looks like something in my new Iron Man armor is killing me. But he doesn't want to stick around, because he basically tells the doctor, he's like, look, I'm going to take a pass at that. I'll keep an eye on things. If it gets worse, you'll be the first to know. So he's driving away, and he's thinking to himself as he's heading to his new home base, he's decided he's not going to stop being Iron Man, because the armor's, as he puts it, the armor's major functions are based on principles used in the old red and gold armor. So while he may have some new experimental weapon system that he thinks that's what's kind of messing with his physiology, he kind of wants to try to figure it out on his own, because he's Tony freaking Stark, right? So he gets to his new base of operations. He's based out of California at this point. He's outside LA. There's a new Stark Enterprises that's being built. It's nearly complete. The office space is ready. The building is there. He's got a temporary housing off-site, site adjacent. And he's there because he's also got a new space station, the Stark space station, that is also nearly complete. He has one more trip to the space station to install some final components, and then the space station will be complete. And Rhodey is going to be flying the shuttle. And for all appearances, Rhodey's the one doing the repairs. He's flying alone in a space shuttle to the space station. And then Iron Man will follow after. Well, as they're discussing this, they're looking at the shuttle and then they're talking about it and they got their backs to the shuttle. We see a crew member, like a ground crew guy. I don't know. He's wearing coveralls and he's looking very shifty. And he's like, there's some fellas with him and he goes, come on guys now while they're not looking. And they all sneak aboard the shuttle. And we're like, what's going on there? That seems very sneaky. And then we get an interlude, Boca Caliente, the small Caribbean island recently invaded and conquered by Advanced Idea Mechanics, or A.I.M. So you got this dude in the yellow A.I.M suit without his helmet. He's sitting at a bank of computers. There's a couple of other A.I.M dudes there standing with him. They're holding guns and they have the big funny looking helmets on, which if you're not familiar with the A.I.M suits, they look kind of like hazmat suits. They're very silly looking. And one of the dudes that's standing there with him, it almost looks like they're guarding him. And the guy's like, hey, you know what? It's pretty cool that our scientist supreme is still allowing you to do such menial tasks, especially considering that you tried to overthrow him and you failed. That's pretty cool of him, isn't it? And the guy whose name is Jorgen Taikio, he says, yes, I shall have to remember to repay my brother's kindness. And then in his mind, he's saying, once I am the scientist supreme, very, very soon. And you can almost hear him going, cackle, cackle, mustache twisting. He doesn't have a mustache. And that's the end of the interlude. We then go to Tony Stark taking a shower. This is kind of a weird scene because he's taking a shower and he's thinking to himself about all the stuff that he has to do. And if he doesn't hurry up, he's going to be late. And he says, he's thinking to himself, it's a good thing that it only takes a few minutes to dry my hair. And he starts to dry his hair with a very average looking hair dryer, except for it says on the side of it, hair dry 5,000. And he continues to think to himself about, of course, there was a time when it would have only taken seconds instead of minutes to dry his hair. Because back at Stark International, when it was in Long Island, New York, he had this thing, this invention that he had created called the micro dryer, which would have dried his hair in seconds instead of minutes. I find this a really odd scene, and I have to point it out because I am assuming the purpose of this scene is A, to kind of remind you of maybe what's gone on before. Apparently, before all this happened, there was a period in Tony's life. If you remember from movie 1, the big bad was Obadiah Stane. Well, before this run happened, that was the storyline with Obadiah Stane, and whatever he did took Tony Stark out of Stark International, and he lost all his money, and he was ruined, and he creates the new armor, and he fights Ironmonger, and everything is good again, and now he's got all his money back. But he is basing his operations out of California instead of Long Island and New York, and I guess this is kind of a scene to help you remember that, but it almost seems like life is so hard now because it takes me minutes to dry my hair with an average hair dryer instead of the seconds it used to take with my micro dryer. It'll be nice because he makes a comment about how it'll be nice to get back to a more permanence type of aspect to his life because he's still rebuilding at this point. And I don't know, it's like, hey, I lost all my money, but I'm back. I pulled myself back up from my bootstraps. That, my friends, is the American dream. You too could be a billionaire as long as you can invent stuff like a micro dryer. Once he's showered, squeaky clean, he asks his secretary if his call to Senator Boynton has been returned. It has not. So he's kind of upset about that. He's going to into the control room for the launch of the shuttle, and he's thinking to himself, because a lot of the story beats back then, a lot of the exposition, most of what you learned in regard to what was going on in the story was through thought bubbles. And he says to himself, ever since A.I.M took over Boca Caliente, Boynton and the State Department have blocked all efforts to aid the island's enslaved citizens. And this has nothing to do with this issue. This is a story plot point that will unfold later. I think it's a very important plot point because at some point when the whole Armor Wars thing happens, most of that is because of Tony has lost. He's no longer satisfied with the way that I guess the government gets things done. And this is kind of your first hint at that. He's a bit disgruntled about the bureaucracy of government. So Rhodey takes the shuttle up to the space station. Tony follows in his new red and silver suit. We see Rhodey on the space station. He's working away. He's riveting. And he's kind of bored. And he thinks to himself that a little Whitney Houston sure would make this riveting job a lot smoother. And he's going to have to talk to Tony about putting a stereo system on the shuttle. Well, that's about the time that Tony arrives. And he's installing the final circuit board that will turn on the security system and all the monitors so they can see what's going on in all areas of the space station. And he slides the control panel, the circuit board into place, and he says, "See?" And all the monitor banks come on, pop, pop, pop. And you can see all areas of the space station. And that's when Rhodey, he's looking at them and he's like, "Holy cow, what's that? We have some people in the data room." And there are some A.I.M soldier people, soldier scientists. I'm not sure what they are, but they're in their A.I.M suits, but they're kind of modified space suits. And so Tony and Rhodey, they go to fight the A.I.M soldier scientist dudes. All Rhodey has with him is a rivet gun, even though he told Tony that he was bringing the red and gold armor with him, but all he's got is this riveting gun. And so he's shooting rivets at these A.I.M dudes. What do you call the A.I.M guys? I mean, they're soldiers. Are they scientists? Are they terrorists? I don't know. We'll just call them the A.I.M dudes. And there's a big fight going on. And one of the A.I.M dudes, he pulls out this test tube and he's like, "Ha ha! We'll stop you." And he throws it at the ground and it busts open. And this weird blob thing just starts increasing its mass. It's just big, blobby, pinky, weird freaking thing. And he tells them that it's like a biological weapon, a virus that there is no cure for. And it will continue to replicate and become bigger and bigger and bigger until it takes over the entire station. And any organic material it touches, well, as an example, one of the A.I.M dudes, Rhodey shot him in the face, or at least the side of the head, with his rivet gun, so it ripped his helmet open. Well, this virus thing, this blob virus, gets into his suit and just kills him. But he looks like he's been hit by like an old man ray or something, because he all of his hair falls out. And he looks like some kind of weird mutant guy. And then he dies. And they're like, "Holy crap, we got to stop that." The A.I.M dudes run off. And Rhodes says, "Look, I'll go get them. You take care of this virus." And so he goes chasing after them. Tony, no matter what he can do, he cannot stop this thing. He shoots at it with his repulsors. It burns up a little, but not enough. It just keeps replicating so much that he can't keep up with it. He uses the Omni Beam in his chest. He uses sonics. He uses all this stuff, and nothing is stopping it. And he decides the only thing he can do is seal up every door in the station until he can figure something out. So he starts sealing up the station, and Rhodey then is trapped in this room. But then suddenly the virus is there and it's eating through the door. So shutting the doors really doesn't do anything but slow it down. And so he's hollering at Tony on his radio, "I need some help. The virus is coming in. What'd you do? You shut me in this freaking room on a space station, and this virus is coming." And Tony's like, "Oh, there's really not a lot I can do right now." And Rhodes is like, "What? Well, of course, Tony's not just going to leave him there. And eventually Tony busts down one of the doors and he grabs Rhodey and he says, let's go. Let's forget about the A.I.M dudes. Let's get you out of here. And they head to the docking part of the station where the shuttle is. And oh my goodness, the shuttle's gone. Why? Because the A.I.M dudes took it. Right? They came up there in the shuttle. They were stowed away. Those are the guys at the beginning of the issue that were like, come on, let's sneak onto the shuttle. That's who that was. So they're leaving in the shuttle. And so now Rhodes, he's trapped. He's trapped on the station. Tony can leave whenever he wants. His armor, he can go into space in his armor. But Rhodey, nope, can't do it. So Tony's left with this choice, and he has to leave Rhodey on the station while he goes to get the shuttle back. And so he leaves him there, and he flies out of an airlock, and he gets into the shuttle, and he's telling the A.I.M dudes, it's over, fellas. And one of the guys says, I don't think so. See, the whole reason that they had infiltrated the station in the first place was they were stealing some data. Apparently, when A.I.M took over this island, Boca Caliente, they used one of their satellites as part of it. Tony's satellite was close enough that it could have recorded something. It could have gathered evidence. It's got evidence on its data banks that Tony could use with the State Department to help shut A.I.M down and get that island back. And he never realized it until A.I.M came up to steal it. And this guy tells Tony, he's like, look, Iron Man, our job was to get this data pad, this data panel, this circuit board, whatever, this freaking hard drive. We are either supposed to get it or destroy it so that no one gets it. And you've left us no choice. A.I.M always does what they're told, and he pushes a button, and the frickin' shuttle explodes. Not the whole thing, but the cabin, killing all of the A.I.M dudes. And Tony's like, holy crap, what kind of people are these that they would blow themselves up? But now he's like, oh, he doesn't know what to do at this point. The shuttle is now blown up. It's worthless. There's a big hole in it. It doesn't work. Rhodey is stuck on the station. How is he going to get Rhodey down? He can't leave him there because the virus will get him. And that's when he sees that Rhodey did bring the red and gold armor with him. The briefcase is there in the cabin, floating in the gravity. So he grabs it. He gets back on he gets back on the space station. Rhodey puts the armor on. They leave the station. They're floating outside in space, outside of the space station. And Tony's really he's pretty PO'd, because just like that, that's me snapping my finger. Just like that, station is no longer, he can't use it. Nobody will ever be able to use it unless they can cure this virus. It has now taken over the station completely. No one will ever be able to get on that station again. And he's pretty upset about it. But there's nothing that they can do about it right now. So they start heading back to Earth, back to the planet. And as they're entering the atmosphere, Rhodey realizes that it's starting to get really hard for him to breathe. And that's when Tony realizes that the explosion in the space shuttle screwed up the armor's oxygen system. And he says, okay, well, we just got to get into the atmosphere as quick as possible. Hit your maximum boot jets. And they're rocketing through the atmosphere. And he says, he's like, Rhodey, how's it going? He goes, well, I still can't breathe very well. And now it's suddenly getting very hot. And then Tony realizes that the stuff on the armor that makes it so he doesn't burn up in the atmosphere as they're re-entering has also been damaged. And so he tells Rhodey to go limp, and he grabs onto the armor and he starts flying so that he is in front. So he's taking the brunt of the heat from re-entry. But it doesn't do a lot of good, because once they get to a certain point, Rhodey says, everything's shutting down. My cooling system is shutting down. And oh no, the eye slits and the mouth slits opening on its own. I can breathe again. But Tony, holy crap, I'm on fire. And there's this great last panel where you get a close-up of the red and gold armor, and just pouring out of the eye slits and the mouth slit is just this black smoke. And that's how the issue ends. It was a really fun issue. I'll be honest with you. Like I said, this is the era of Iron Man that I remember, but I don't recall ever reading this issue. This is the first in an epic collection that I bought that is about the Armor Wars. But when they do these epic collections, they don't just put in it's the Armor Wars epic collection, but it's not just that storyline. They always do a really good job of adding 6 or 7 issues before that kind of lead into that storyline. And then the Armor Wars will end the collection. I remember the Armor Wars. I remember looking through the list of Iron Man books that came before this issue. I remember reading some of those, but not all of them. But I really enjoyed this. And I have to tell you, the art team of Mark Bright and Bob Layton, for me, there are two, when it comes to the classic Iron Man look for me, Mike Zeck, when he drew Iron Man for Secret Wars, that stands out for me. John Romita Jr. at some point in the beyond this storyline will take over on Iron Man. I think John Byrne writes those stories. That stands out for me. And then the Mark Bright, Bob Layton art team and that red and silver armor. That's the bread and butter for me right there. That's what I remember most about Iron Man. When I think back to my nostalgic childhood, that's the era of Iron Man that I remember. And so I'm going to keep reading these books, folks, and we're going to keep talking about them. Again, it's in an Epic collection if you want to go out there and grab it. I think right now it's $25 on Comixology. I know that the Armor Wars trade is available through Hoopla, through your library, if you just want to check that out. We'll get to that after a bit. But this is some good stuff from what I remember from the Iron Man days. It's funny because for me, if I think back and I think back to what my favorite classic Iron Man look is, it's the red and gold armor. It's the armor that he was wearing in Secret Wars. It's the armor that he's wearing during Demon in a Bottle, which is the whole Tony Stark is an alcoholic thing. But when I see him in the silver and red, the red and silver with the big freaking triangle shoulder pad things, that stirs up some good nostalgic feelings within me as well, because he was in that armor for a long time during the period of time I was reading books. Whether it was the Iron Man books, the Avengers books, or the West Coast Avengers books, I feel like a lot of my a major, at least half of my history with Iron Man, he was wearing that armor. It was either that or the red and gold. And I do remember when it comes to storylines from those days, and I think of Iron Man, if anybody was to ask me what's your favorite Iron Man story, well, I would say Armor Wars, because it's really the only Iron Man story that I can think of that was like a classic story. I don't remember reading the whole Ironmonger Obadiah Stane stuff. I did read Demon in a Bottle, the dealing with Iron Man or Tony Stark as an alcoholic. I do remember liking that, but for me, it was always Armor Wars. I just really enjoyed that as a kid. Tony Stark going out there and just kicking butt and taking names. And again, we're going to get to that stuff, so I hope you stick around. Hey, before I leave you, I want to remind everybody I got a Discord server out there. Go to discord.stevenorelse.com if you're into the whole Discord thing, and, join me over there. Please, will ya? Until then, I'm Steven. That's me. That's my name. And you know what I am? Hey, I'm just another fanboy. Be nice to each other. Just Another Fanboy is a presentation of the Steven or Else podcast. Questions and comments can be directed to feedback@stevenorelse.com. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/StevenRor and get instant access to the My Other podcast, a weekly show about whatever crawls its way into my tiny little mind just moments before I tap record. You can find me on the World Wide Web at stevenorelse.com or find me on Twitter and Instagram by searching for @StevenOrElse. I also encourage you to subscribe to the show, leave us a 5-star review, and share this episode with a friend. Just Another Fanboy is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. You can find that over at comicspodcasts.com. All links will be in the show notes.
Bye-bye, Daddy.
Good job.